Okay, today's presentation is OSHA record keeping. And why are we doing this in January? Well, because you've got a current filing or posting requirement coming up here in the near future. On February 1st, we've got to post up our OSHA 300A summaries. And so every year we do this. This is a kind of a tradition that we do this training because it's confusing. It's something that is a challenge, and if you're not working with it all the time and you're faced with doing this, it's kind of daunting. And so we like to do this each year and to keep people up to date on that, and really to bring up any changes that have happened. And whoops, not sure why my slides aren't changing right. So I decided this year to hit the what's new first off, because I know some of you here are pros and you've done this for a long time and you're pretty comfortable with it, but you want to find out what's new in OSHA record keeping. What are the things that I have to keep in mind? And just like everything else, COVID-19 has reared its ugly head and entered into OSHA record keeping requirements. So quick and dirty for this is that COVID-19 is a recordable illness on your OSHA 300 log if and only if it is a work-related transmission. So what does that mean? Well, if you have somebody at your workplace that just they get COVID, what do I have to do? I've got to do some sort of investigation to ensure whether that case was transmitted at work or not. And sometimes that's pretty obvious. Yeah, we had people in the same department and everybody in the department got COVID. That's probably a pretty good likelihood that that's going to be a recordable COVID case. But if it's a one-off, somebody just ended up getting COVID and there's no indication after our investigation that there was transmission in the workplace, then that wouldn't be a recordable COVID case. It's really up to you to make that decision, but you want to be able to justify those decisions. And so if you're questioned on that by OSHA, Utah OSHA, you ought to have a good justification of why you made the decision that you did. And just one other thing on electronic reporting, we've covered this in the past, but some people may have the question out there, hey, I've seen this on electronic OSHA 300 reporting. Do we have to do that? And the quick answer to that is no. We are local government agencies and we are not regulated under federal OSHA. Utah OSHA, we are regulated under Utah OSHA, and Utah OSHA doesn't want that information. They already have it. They already receive it through the Labor Commission, through the reporting that we do to them every time we have an incident. And so the nice thing, and we'll let you off the hook early on this, is that we don't have to do that electronic reporting. Now, if you're a private agency, it's a whole different story, and we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation if you want to get into all the detail on that. And just a reminder, folks, if you do have a question, type it into the chat box and we'll answer that as we go along. It's easy to forget what those questions are if we don't write them down at the time. All right, told you I'm going fast on this one. Quick overview here. I've already talked about this. There's federal OSHA and there's state OSHA. Federal OSHA has the overall responsibility for workplace health and safety. But some states have their own plan. They can run their own show, and Utah is one of those. And so here in Utah, we have the Utah Occupational and Safety. It's a division of the Labor Commission, and they run our OSHA programs for us. Okay, what does that mean? Well, that means that they control that here at the state level. That means that you can go downtown and you can talk to them, downtown Salt Lake, and you can sit down and discuss with them. They have a consultation program, all of those things. It's a good program, and we like those folks far better than the federal OSHA people that come out of Washington, D.C. and may not understand everything that makes up Utah. Okay, so as I talk about this throughout the course of this presentation, there's federal OSHA. They set the OSHA record keeping regulations. Utah runs their own program. That program has to be at least as stringent as the federal requirements. Some states have taken that to great extents. California with their Cal OSHA is one of those, and they're super complicated, and they've added a lot more. Utah really hasn't added a lot. So they pretty much follow the federal regulations, and then we have to go with that. But the forms may be a little bit different because we have a Utah program, and the people that we do our reporting to if we have serious injuries is different because we have that state program. All right, that took longer than it was supposed to. Why do we keep injury records? So this guy hasn't been around for 4 years, but I got an idea he'll probably be back. Dr. David Michaels was the Assistant Secretary of Labor for OSHA during the Obama administration, and he said accurate records are important. They have a life-saving purpose, and I really agree with him on this. We live and die by data, especially here at the Trust. We use data all the time to see what direction we're going, what things are, types of incidents are happening more than others, and we try to look ahead to be able to build our training to go out and look for specific things based on what the data tells us. So OSHA collects this information, and then they use it to direct their compliance or their enforcement efforts. So if you have a higher than normal incident rate, if you have certain types of injuries, federal OSHA may come out and take a look at you based on this type of information. If OSHA shows up at your facility to do a wall-to-wall inspection, they're going to want to see your OSHA records, your 300 logs and your 300A summaries. They're going to want to look at those to see what type of incidents that you're having. So this is a compliance obligation that we have. It really doesn't serve a lot of other function besides meeting that compliance obligation, but it can have some side benefits to us of helping us understand what our injuries are and where they're coming from. Okay. All right. So it's found in 29 CFR 1904. If you want to look that up. Why do I throw that in there? Well, sometimes you need to go right to the source. I hope I do a good job explaining this to you and showing you what the requirements are. But sometimes it's you go and you read the standard. Oh, this is exactly what it's saying. There are some exemptions. Some people don't have to comply with this, and we'll talk about those on the next slide. There are forms. When I talk about the OSHA 300 log, that's where we log our OSHA recordable injuries. The 301 is the first report of injury. In Utah, we have an analogous form. They call it a 122, but it's the same information. Those of you that signed up earlier, I sent out for this webinar, I sent out the forms that I'm referring to right now just a few minutes ago. So you should have those in your email. If not, send me an email to Jason at Utah Trust, and I'll make sure that I get you a copy of those. But you have those forms. The 300A is a summary of everything that you recorded, all of those cases. Now, I sent you two different copies of the 300. One is a PDF. The other one is in Microsoft Excel. I highly recommend that you use the Microsoft Excel version because it automatically populates your 300A summary. It's much easier to use it that way. Okay, we do have a posting requirement coming on February 1st, and it has to stay posted up till April 30th. All right, we're going to talk about compensable versus OSHA recordable claims and recordable versus reportable. All right, so compensable. There may be an injury that has occurred that is a workers' compensation compensable claim. It's something that was work related, and we're going to end up paying for that injury. But it may not be OSHA recordable. It might be something we send somebody to the doctor, and they have a back strain, and the doctor says, put some ice on it, you'll be fine, go back to work. So there was nothing besides first aid done, and they sent them back. Well, there's some costs associated with that, so there's probably a workers' compensation claim. We're going to pay out some money, but it may not be an OSHA recordable. We'll talk about the details of that. Hold on. Then there's recordable versus reportable. And I hate that we have these two words that are so close together. They both start with R. Recordable, your OSHA 300 log is for you. You keep this log. You don't send it to anybody, but you have to maintain it. I have to keep 5 years of this log. And I keep that on site. When OSHA shows up, and they ask me to see my OSHA 300 logs, I have to provide that to them. If I get a letter from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and they send me a survey, I legally am obligated to send that information. It's more the summary type information of that, okay? So recordable and reportable are two different things. A reportable claim is a serious injury where I have a quick reporting requirement, 8 hours in the state of Utah. I got to call up. I have a fatality. I have somebody lose an eye. I have a serious, a significant broken bone, loss of consciousness, hospitalization, those things. I have to report those to OSHA. Okay. So that's the difference between a recordable and a reportable. All right. So let's see who is required or maybe exempt from these requirements. You have to have less than 10 employees in a calendar year, full-time equivalent employees, to be exempt. Well, what does that mean? We look by hours. So I may have 10 employees, but they don't work full-time. Well, I'm out. I'm exempt. But I might have 5 employees that work a whole lot of overtime that it puts me over the hours to be a full-time equivalence. So in the state of Utah, the OSHA inspector, I talked about this, they say it's 11. If you got 11 employees, you're there. Complicating factors on that is in a lot of our local governments, we have a lot of volunteers, whether they're volunteer firefighters or you name it. Under state code definitions, they are employees. And so we need to count their hours as well. Okay. All right. So who counts? Full and part-time employees, volunteers, like I said, contractors do not. So if you're hiring somebody, a contractor, to come in and do work for your organization, you don't have to count them on your numbers, and you don't have to put them on your OSHA 300 log if they get injured in the course of doing their job. Temporary employees do not. What does that mean? Well, if I maybe bring on seasonal help in my park from a temp agency, because it's a lot easier to manage people, the hiring process and all of that. And it's easier if I don't like them, I can just say, don't send them anymore. And I don't have to deal with that. Well, the other benefit we get from those using a temp agency is the temp agency owns those employees. They are employees of Kelly Services or whatever the temp agency is that we use, and they record their injuries on their 300 log. Okay. All right. There are some industries that are exempt or partially exempt. The trust falls into this category. So the trust, we look in here and it talks about insurance. Well, the trust falls into that category. When we look at this, probably the easiest definition is if your business looks more like an office than it does a shop or a construction company, there's a chance that you're exempt. Now, just because you have a lot of office employees doesn't necessarily mean that you're exempt. Let's take a city, for example. I got a whole bunch of office employees, but I have public works folks that are out there working in the street. That would make it so I'm not exempt. They're out there, or police officers or firefighters. Those are not exempt industries. Okay. All right. So OSHA recordable versus a workers' compensation claim. Like I said, you could call up Doug or Brent or myself and say, hey, can you give me a list of my OSHA or of my work comp claims for 2020? I need to fill out my OSHA 300 log, and we're happy to do that for you. But that may not be the whole story. There may be some incidents that happen that are OSHA recordable that you didn't claim as a workers' compensation claim. Now, those will be pretty limited, but it could happen. An OSHA recordable injury isn't always a workers' compensation claim. So realize that you've got to look at the grand scheme of things and look at each of those incidents that happen, each of those injuries or illnesses, and you make the call on recordability. As the employer, you have to make that determination. Well, how do we do that? Well, we've got to look at the information that we have at hand. We take our first reports of injury. Like I said, that's the 301 log, 301 form, and that's included in both the PDF and the Excel version. Just as you're looking at the Excel version, look at the tabs, because you've got a 300, a 301, and the 300A are all in there, but they're on separate tabs. The first report of injury, you don't have to use OSHA's form, but you have to collect the information that they ask for on that form. Now, and you have 7 calendar days to submit that to the Utah Labor Commission. Now, don't panic, because we do that for you. If you have started a workers' compensation claim, the adjuster will ask you all the questions that are on the 301 or the Utah 122 form, and we submit that for you if you submit a workers' comp claim. Now, if it's not a workers' comp claim, if you don't make a work comp claim on that, then you have that responsibility to submit that to the state if it's an OSHA recordable. All right. Oh, and just an FYI on that, the doctors do submit a corresponding claim, and then Utah OSHA will go in and they balance those out and say, hey, you've got a stack this big of doctors' forms, and your 122 forms are down here. Are you really submitting all of those? And I've seen OSHA come in and they come prepared. As they come in to do a wall-to-wall inspection, they know how many 121 claims, the doctor's claims, have come in. All right. So we have this is the incident report. We'll spend a lot of time on that. I did send you a copy that we made up that has all the questions on it. I think it's just a little better, easier format than the OSHA one to use, but you can use whatever you want. You can make your own. Just make sure that you collect all the information from the 301 form. All right. So recordable versus reportable. Recordable injuries go on the 300 log. Reportable injuries must be called in to Utah OSHA, okay? All reportable injuries are recordable, but not necessarily all recordable injuries are reportable, and the vast majority are not. So let's look at what a reportable injury is. Within 8 hours, you need to call this number here. So, if you want to jot down this number, might not be a bad idea to have that one handled, have that handy, because you got 8 hours. Call Utah OSHA at that number within 8 hours of all of the occurrence of all fatalities, disabling, significant, and serious injuries or illnesses. Well, I've never liked that definition, because it's it's pretty subjective. What's significant? What's serious? For one person, it may be one thing. It's just a flesh wound, right? I just lost an arm. But for other people, a paper cut may be significant or serious. So let's talk about those. So within 8 hours, fatalities. Within 20, this is the federal reporting. So we're not, so this is what OSHA requires. Definitely anything that requires an inpatient hospitalization would be something that you would report within 8 hours in Utah. The 24 hours doesn't count. It's 8 hours in Utah. Amputations, losses of an eye, So loss of consciousness. What's an amputation? An amputation, if I get the end of my finger pinched and it takes a hunk of flesh off, but no bone, that's not an amputation. If it takes bone, that's an amputation. Okay. If I break my pinky, that is not a broken bone that Utah OSHA wants to hear about. But if I break my femur or I break a significant bone in my body, that is something that they want to hear about. Well, what does that mean? Well, if I call OSHA and tell them about this, the risk that I run is that they show up at my facility and do an investigation of that incident. You could get citations from that. What's the downside if I don't report? Well, you could get a citation for not reporting these significant or serious injuries. How do I make that decision? Well, look at the definition. Go back there for some reason. Make that, look at that. And if it isn't really clear, if it isn't really apparent, give us a call. Doug and Brent or myself are happy to walk you through that. I'm even happy to give OSHA a call for you and say, hey, I'm asking for a friend. Is this something that should be reported to you? Okay, and we can make that decision together. Question here, what about an employee who says she is lightheaded, lays down on the floor, and requests an ambulance? Then she was taken to the hospital for observation overnight, ongoing health issue claimed by the employee, returns to work the day after. Is that reportable? If there's no loss of consciousness, no, not a reportable thing. And if it's a personal health issue, probably not a compensable claim too. Hard to make a call with a short description there without knowing all of that. But no, that would not be a reportable claim. Okay, good question. Okay, new requirements. We had an executive order several years ago that required electronic reporting of OSHA 301 data. And originally it was going to be all of your 300 data. I've already told you this already. You don't have to do this in the state of Utah because you're a local government agency. We're not regulated under federal OSHA. We're under state OSHA. And they don't want the information because they already have it, because we report this information to the Labor Commission within 7 days of having the incident. Okay. All right. Just a quick reminder, when you post your 300A summary, this is a good time to take a look at all of your labor law postings and make sure they're all up to date. There's a website right here, or you can just Google Utah labor law posting, and if it comes up with a link to the Labor Commission, that's going to be the one. You can go in there, download a PDF of every one of those labor law posters, and print them off and post them up there. So then we meet those compliance obligations. I bring that up just because I'm going to the bulletin board to post this 300A summary. You just will make sure those are up to date. Okay. And that's one, I didn't cover that in detail on there. When I post this 300A, it needs to be in a relatively public area, not public for the general public, but public for employees. So many of you will have your labor law postings on a bulletin board in the break room or in the hallway outside the break room. That's a good place to post that 300A summary. All right, recordable injuries. We got to make a decision whether it goes on this 300 log or not. And you have the responsibility as the employer to do that. Here's some steps that OSHA gives us. Did the employee experience an injury or illness? Well, duh, yeah, that's why we're asking these questions. Is the injury or illness work-related? So back to Kathy's question there, is it work related? Well, no, they had whatever it was, a diabetic issue, or they got lightheaded from not eating enough food or something like that, but it was not a work related thing. Well, we stop at that point. If it is a work related illness or injury, Then we say, is it a new case? If it isn't, this is a re-aggravation of something that happened a couple of years ago. We go back to our old 300 log from a couple of years ago and update that case. If something needed, maybe they went off work, lost time, or they had some restrictions given to them, we go back to that time, back to that other report. If it is a new case, then it says, does the injury or illness meet the general recording criteria for the application or the application to specific causes? All right, then it gets a little more challenging. So we have to go through and look at this. What makes it an OSHA recordable? Okay, there is a difference between an illness and an injury. That seems pretty simple. An injury is an abnormal condition or disorder, a cut, a laceration, a burn, fracture, amputation. An illness is an acute or a chronic disease of one form or another. So as we look at recordable illnesses, there could be skin disorders, a respiratory condition, poisoning, hearing loss. There are other things like tuberculosis. If I get a work-related exposure to tuberculosis and I come down with it, guess what? That's a recordable illness, and we can now add COVID-19 to that if it is a work-related injury. Just because I have TB or because I have COVID-19 doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be on the 300. We need to do the investigation and be able to show one way or the other, was this a workplace related transmission of this disease? Okay. All right. So the recording criteria must be work related, must be a new case, and it needs to meet the OSHA criteria. So let's dive in. A case is presumed work related if and only if, whoops, excuse me, too many buttons here. If an event or exposure in the work environment is the discernible cause of the injury or illness, or of a significant aggravation to a pre-existing condition. Okay, so something at work caused this, or re-aggravated a pre-existing condition. All right, so here are some things that are exceptions. If I'm traveling for work or I'm doing personal errands during the work day and I get injured during that, let's say I'm traveling, I've gone to a conference and I slip and fall at the pool at my hotel, that is not a work-related case that would be recorded on my 300A because I'm on my personal time. Recreation or fitness, it would not be either. Eating, drinking, or preparing my own food. So I slice my finger while I'm cutting my sandwich for lunch, or I burn my tongue on my hot beverage. That is not something that would be a OSHA recordable claim. Grooming, personal meds. If I, poke myself in the eye while I'm putting on my eye makeup, something like that, that is not something that would be an OSHA recordable. Or motor vehicle accident in the parking lot or on my commute, those are not either. And things like the cold and the flu. Now, OSHA kind of jumped a little bit here on COVID. I personally think COVID is probably a little more online with these two, but because of the seriousness of COVID, OSHA says, hey, we got to record these. Mental illness is not something that would be recorded on your OSHA 300 log. Okay, so recordable injuries would be death, injuries that require days away from work, or restricted work activity, or job transfer, or loss of consciousness, a significant illness or injury, or medical treatment beyond first aid. So obviously, death, days away from work, those are pretty easy to say, yeah, that's going to be a recordable type claim. But what other things? Medical treatment beyond first aid. That's the real hard decision that we have to make. Well, what is first aid? I think most of us have a fairly good idea of what first aid is. Slap a Band-Aid on. If you put a Band-Aid on a scratch or a cut, that's first aid. But some things may not be quite as easy. So let's go through. Non-prescription at non-prescription dose is first aid. So if I take ibuprofen at non-prescription strength, I take 400 milligrams of whatever it says on the bottle of my ibuprofen. That is not something that would require that. However, if the doctor gives you a prescription, or your employee a prescription for ibuprofen 800s, same stuff, but he writes a script, even if you don't fill that prescription, that makes it an OSHA recordable case. Okay. Non-prescription at prescription dose, the doc may give you that prescription and say, hey, if you've got ibuprofen, just take 800 milligrams. You don't have to go out and fill this prescription. Because the doc gave you that script, or gave the injured employee that script, that makes it an OSHA recordable case. Okay. All right. Some other things that are kind of oddities here. Drilling fingernails. You take if you ever black your finger, you smash your finger, and you get that the blood under the fingernail. It hurts really, really bad. You can take it's a hot wire. We call it drilling, but it's not really a drill bit. It's a hot wire that melts a hole through your fingernail. Sounds terrible, but when you release that pressure under there, it just feels, it's the best feeling you've ever had, because it hurts so bad. Anyway, that is first aid. Cleaning, flushing, soaking wounds. So if I wash an injury, a cut, if I can wash an object out of my eye, if I can take a tissue and just get an object out of my eye, that is first aid. If I have to surgically remove it, that isn't. So let's say I get a sliver and I physically can't get it out, or it's too small. I can't remove it, and I have to go in for surgical removal. That is an OSHA recordable case. Okay. Staples and sutures are not first aid. If you have to get staples, or you have to get some stitches, that would make it an OSHA recordable case. However, if you put a steri strip or a butterfly bandage on there, that is first aid. Okay. All right. When it comes to braces, there's a hard line, and is it hard? Non-rigid support. So maybe I got some tennis elbow, and I put one of those bands on my forearm, and it makes that pain go away in my elbow. Then that is something that would not be an OSHA recordable. But if it's a rigid brace, they give me a brace that holds my hand or my wrist solid so I can't move it, that would be an OSHA recordable case. Temporary isolation. So let's say I put I buddy splint my fingers together because I think I've broken my finger. A temporary isolation, I put something on my knee, that would not be. Okay. Or that would be first aid and would not be OSHA recordable. Okay. Vaccinations. We've got a
Jason.
Yeah.
There's another question here about, what about glue, using glue to close a cut?
Good question. So super glue. There's a definition on this. Doug, help me on that. Pull that one up, and I believe they went two different directions on that, and currently I believe that is first aid. But I'm gonna ask Doug to do so. I should have
checked that.
I should have anticipated that question. All right. Whoops. Here we go. Vaccinations. If I step on a nail and I go and get a tetanus shot just to make sure I don't get that nasty disease, that is first aid. However, if I get exposed to somebody's blood and the doc says you need to get a hepatitis shot because of that, that is not first aid, and you have to record that. Sorry about some of these, splitting hairs on that, but that's what the That's what the regulation and the definition says, and that's why we do this webinar every year. All right. First aid. Cold or hot therapy is first aid. Physical therapy or chiropractic is not. Massages, just a therapeutic massage, can be first aid, but if it broaches the level of being physical therapy or chiropractic, where there's physical manipulation, those types of things, that can go across that line to be an OSHA recordable. All right, needle sticks. In here, in the standard, it says all needle sticks or punctures by sharp where someone is exposed to others' blood or potentially infectious material must be recorded. So any needle stick. So a lot of us out there have fire departments, EMS folks, law enforcement, and they end up dealing with hypodermic needles or other sharps, and people get poked with that. All of those need to be recorded on your 300 log. Now, that being said, if I work at a hypodermic needle factory and I poke myself with a brand new needle that has not been exposed to somebody else's blood, that is not an OSHA recordable case. All right, so how do we complete the 300 log? Well, we fill it out, and it's pretty simple. I've got to put these cases on there within 7 days of knowledge that the injury occurred. So I would set a reminder, whether it's every Friday or every Monday, whatever you decide, set a reminder that pops up on your computer, update the 300 log. And then you go back in the last 7 days and you add any cases that have come in during that time, and you update the cases that were already there. We want to update that as the claims mature or change. Why do we do that? Well, we don't know when OSHA is going to show up. And so we want to have those up to date. Now, a lot of people are, once a year, they'll get this together. You're taking a risk by waiting until January every year. Because if OSHA shows up, they'll say, let's see your 300 log. And you say, can you give me a couple minutes? And they're going to say, yeah, I'll write out your citation while you're taking care of those. We need to maintain these logs for at least 5 years. Okay, so have 5 years on hand. They can be electronic or hard copy. I recommend electronic just because it's easier to deal with those. They're easier to update. You're not erasing when you're changing how many days out and restricted days, all of those things. So this is going to be kind of hard to see here, so I'm going to make it a little bit bigger there. Our case number, and I know these are really small things that we're talking about, but they're the questions that we get every year. What's the case number? You could use your workers' compensation case number, but what I always did, just to keep it, it needs to be unique to this individual case. I would use the last 2 digits of the year. So this year would be 21, and then I did a -01. So the first case for the year would be 21-01, and then you add, and then the next case would be 21-02. Okay, pretty simple way. It just needs to be unique to that case. The employee's name, simple. Their job title, date of injury or onset of illness. With the injuries, it's fairly easy because, well, I sliced my finger today. Okay, when if it's an illness, that may be a little harder. You might have to use the day that it was reported to you if we can't really pin that down when it happened. Where the event occurred, be specific about that. In here, they say the loading dock north end is the example that they give. Be specific to the location, and then describe the injury or illness, the body parts affected, and object or substance that directly injured or made the person ill. So the example they give, 2nd-degree burns on right forearm from acetylene torch. Be detailed on this. Make sure we're saying what body part, is it left or right? And what caused that, and OSHA is going to look at that and make sure that you have good detail on there. And just a sideline on that, as we get new claims that come in, and we read those every day as the new claims come in, sometimes those descriptions are not very good. Sometimes it's a workers' comp claim and it says auto accident or fell down. But it doesn't give us any of the detail. What did they hurt? It could be an auto accident. Well, it could be their head. It could be their toe. We don't know. So be really detailed as far as, injured right toe on a rock that was laying in the walkway. Okay. Right. Big right great toe. We want to even get down to which toe it was. All right. So now we're going to classify each of these, and we're moving left to right through this log. We want to classify that. Is it a death? No. Did it involve days away from work? No. Did it involve job transfer or restriction? No. If that's all the case, if we say no to all of those, then we can put on there, it's an other recordable case. Those are the ones, if we have to put it on there, we hope that's what it is. Did it involve days away from work? Yes, then we have to count those days, and for job transfer and restriction. Over here on the right-hand side, was it an injury, a skin disorder, a respiratory condition? So if we do have a COVID case that becomes recordable, that's going to be a respiratory condition. Is it a poisoning? Carbon monoxide would probably be in that poisoning case, hearing loss, or all other cases. Okay. Or excuse me, all other illnesses. Okay, so tuberculosis, or actually tuberculosis would be a respiratory. Let's see, Milker's nodules would be in all other illnesses because it's not a respiratory. All right, so I think we covered all of that. How do we count the days? These are the days away from work. How do we count those? We don't count the day of the injury because they were there at work.
Jason?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Before you get away from that too far, the question on the glue, as I checked real quick, there's instances that I found where they said, yes, it's considered medical treatment, and other times when they said it's not medical treatment. So basically what it boils down to is, are you using the glue or the steri strip in lieu of sutures? If you're just using it as a wound covering, then it's first aid. But if you're using it as a wound closure, then it's considered medical treatment. I
knew there was some detail on that, and it escaped my mind. So thanks, Doug. Appreciate that. So it depends on how we're using that. And I've seen a lot of people use super glue for a lot of different things. I've seen people use black tape and duct tape and all kinds of things as a wound covering, but is it a closure? Okay. Let's see, question, what if COVID does not affect their respiratory system, but they get a headache and lose smell? It doesn't matter. It's a respiratory transmitted disease, and so it would be counted as a respiratory. Okay, so we're counting days. We don't count the day of the injury. We do, but then we start from the next day and we start counting calendar days, not the days that they're scheduled to work. And we'll count that up to the point where we reach 180 days. Once we get to there, then we just chalk it up. This was a really bad claim, and we can stop counting at that point. Or if the employee quits on their own, we don't have a way to track that. Job transfer or restriction. If the doctor sends back a return to work note and it has restrictions on there, can't lift over 10 pounds, sitting only, or something like that, then we have to track those days. So let's see. So it's on the first day of restriction. Let's see, and we start counting from that point. Once again, calendar days. So other recordable cases. This is kind of everything else that isn't a death, that doesn't involve days away from work or a job transfer or restriction. All right. Our summary, this is what we're concerned about right now, is making sure that we get our summary posted up by that February 1st requirement, that deadline for that. So what do? We count up the totals on every line and we go to the 300A summary and we put that in. Now, if you use the Microsoft Excel version of the 300 log, it will automatically do that. So I highly recommend using that because it puts the information in there for you. We're going to post this up in a public location, meaning public for our employees so they can see. All right. And but we don't post personal information. In the old days, we used to post the 300 log, and we would cover names and things like that. But now the 300A summary kind of makes that just more generic, so we can see that and we don't see the details of people's personal injuries and claims. Okay, there is a certification line on there, so the boss, the chief executive officer, needs to sign that area that says all this information was collected and summarized and it's accurate, and they sign off that that's okay. All right. Let's see, is there a requirement for each different physical? Okay, we will talk about that in just a second. We'll talk about establishments. So Katie, thank you. Good question. All right, so here's the summary. Our established, actually right now is a great time to talk about that. Establishment, what does that mean? Well, you may have your company, to say that, your city, your county, your district, whatever you may be, is an organization, but you may have multiple establishments. What the heck does that mean? Well, we have City Hall, and then across town, we have our Public Works shop. Those are two separate establishments. Now, if all of your buildings are on the same campus, let's say I have City Hall and Public Works is out back, Parks and Rec is out back, the police station is here, and we all use the same break room, we all come into City Hall for those things, that would be one establishment. But if they're physically separated, by distance, or even if they're in the same area and the Public Works folks never come into City Hall, I would probably have a separate 300 log for each one of those establishments. And I know that's a pain and everybody hates this, but this is probably the one most common citation I've seen with our local government agencies when you talk about OSHA goes out and does a wall-to-wall. Is this one here, because we're not counting by establishment. I see a question here. For example, would the certifier be a department head or a city manager? This would be the highest level in your organization. So a city manager, maybe the mayor, maybe a director at a district. It's your chief executive level position. Good question. All right. That's where you're.
And what about drivers that work from multiple locations?
Ooh, good question. It's their home base. So let's say, I mean, Public Works is an easy one, but my guys go out and they're driving all over. They're pushing snow. They're working out in the street. It's their home base. So it'd be the Public Works shop. You got a Meals on Wheels driver. It's the location where they really start their shift, where they pick up the food, those types of things. Great, good questions. All right, other cases on here. If you have a work-related hearing loss, call us. We'll help walk you through that. Medical removal. There are a few OSHA standards that require, like if you're overexposed to lead. I don't think very many of these apply to any of our members, but if you're physically required to remove somebody by an OSHA standard from their job, then there's some other recording there. Call and talk to us about that. Tuberculosis, other things. Privacy cases. So we can have a separate name list for privacy cases. What's a privacy case? Well, things involving people's private parts, if somebody contracts HIV, AIDS, hepatitis, something like that. And really it comes down to illnesses. COVID could end up being a privacy case if the individual that gets this doesn't want their name on the 300 log. That being said, we're not posting this 300 log out, but we don't put those types of cases on there. We'll have a separate list for privacy. Somebody that's involved in had a sexual assault, mental illness, needle sticks were contaminated with other person's blood or materials, or if they request, I don't want my name on that 300 log, we can have a separate list for those privacy cases. All right, cruise through this. So must do, have a separate 300 log for each establishment, for each of those physical locations. Put those cases on there within 7 days. Review and certify and post your 300A by February 1st. Keep these forms for 5 years. Update your 300 changes on a regular basis. And just, I included in the forms that I sent out a milestone report. This is something that I would use when I was dealing with work comp cases at a facility level. Sometimes you've got a case that ends up, taking a long time and it's really complicated. This is a cover sheet because I've got all of this paperwork and it may end up to be a big stack. Put this cover sheet on top and it has a date, and so we can look at the milestones. When did this person go off work? When did they have restrictions? When did they come back to work? When did they have surgery? Whatever it may be, as you're maintaining that. Now, that being said, all of the paperwork that goes along with a workers' comp claim should not be in your 300 log. That should be something separate. Make sure that's, here's my clean 300 log. When OSHA shows up, that's what they're looking at. Keep our 300 our 300As as well, because they're going to want to see those. Here's one other thing. Provide employee access. If an employee comes to you and says, I want to see how you recorded my claim on your 300 log. Under the standard, you have to provide that access. Now you can make an appointment with them. So you could say, all right, that's fine. Come in tomorrow. We'll see you at 8 a.m. and you can take a look at that. We don't allow them to see other claims or cases that are on our 300 log. We keep that we keep that private, but they can see their own case and how it was recorded. Okay, that becomes more of an issue where we have organized labor, but just know that you are required to provide that. On managing your 300 log, talk to your providers. If you've got a doc out there that's writing prescriptions for ibuprofen 800, maybe call the doc and say, hey, we have ibuprofen. This is, and sometimes that's appropriate, but you may want to have that conversation and say, this causes us to have an OSHA 300 entry here, and that increases our incident rate and increases the chance that OSHA is going to come out and do an inspection of us. Okay, let that doc know that you accommodate restrictions and you'll get them back to work. So because not only for an OSHA 300 log, but more importantly for workers' compensation cost, we want to get these people back to work as soon as we possibly can. So let those docs and clinics know we accommodate restrictions. Okay, provide first aid. Have people trained and able to provide first aid, because a lot of times, as a matter of fact, the vast majority of sprains and strains probably will deal with first aid. You can put some ice on it, maybe take some over-the-counter painkillers, and in a day or two, those tend to go away. You can manage a lot of those claims without medical attention, and then a week later or a few days later, if it hasn't got better, then you can go for that medical attention. Be involved with your cases. Know what's going on. Here's that milestone sheet that I talked to you about. The OSHA record keeping, electronic reporting requirements. Like I said, we don't have to do it. federal OSHA actually came to Utah OSHA and said, Utah OSHA said, we're not requiring this information because we already have it. And then federal OSHA came, and the OSHA person that I talked, or the Utah OSHA person that I talked to, said federal OSHA put a gun to our head and told us that we had to collect this. Well, that's for private agencies. Once again, we're not required to do this because we are governmental agencies. So I'm not going to spend any time on this, who's required to do this, because we're all in government. All right, just go quickly through this. And if you do have questions about that, give me a call, send me an email. And you can go to the federal OSHA page. So in summary, keep your forms, keep those clean, keep them where you can find those, update them regularly, and you're going to be great. Okay, questions. I beat an hour. Apologize. This is a big subject here. If you have questions, type those into the chat box, and we'll answer those right now. Doug, what did I miss?
Well, it probably feels like drinking water out of a fire hydrant sometimes, but I think you covered what we need to know for the 300A logs. That was really good. I don't see any other questions coming in unless you do. Nope,
I don't. Folks, if you've got questions, if you don't have a good handle on the claims that you've had, if there are work comp claims through the year, give us a call and we can get you a list of those. Happy to help out. We're happy to help out with that information, to answer questions. But this is just one of those things that takes some time. And truthfully, every year I go back, as I'm doing this, I go back and watch the last year's presentation. And most of the time, I remember a couple of things that I would have forgotten. So if we're not doing it on a regular basis, it's easy to forget. But hey, we're here to help. We'll answer any questions that you have. I don't see any more questions.
So Jason Robb's got a question. He says, "Is there a good chart, or I assume like a flow chart, available to help with the recordable versus reportable decision tree?"
There was that one that I showed in the presentation. Let me see if I can find one that goes a little more into first aid. I think there may be one out there. If I can find it, I will. I'll distribute that to everybody that signed up for the webinar. Good question. And if you've got specifics, as far as, hey, what about this case? Give us a call, and we'll walk through that with you. Let's see the question. Is required quarantine due to work-related COVID-19 exposure a 300 recordable incident since it's time away from work? The answer is no, because quarantine, they didn't actually receive, or they didn't actually contract the illness. Okay. Would somebody who has who does actually receive, does actually take or contract COVID-19 and they're required to stay away from work? Yeah, that would be time away from work. Okay. All right. I think we covered all of those. Folks, thank you very much for your time and attention today. If you have questions, please give us a call, and we're excited for 2021 and being able to get out hopefully sooner than later, and do some risk assessments, visit your safety committees, and do training and all of those things. Thanks for working hard. Have a great day and be safe out there. Okay, thanks folks. See ya.